Alexander Chen pressed his forehead against the cool window of his luxury car as it glided through the rain-slicked streets. The soft patter of raindrops mixed with classical music playing quietly through the premium speakers. He loosened his silk tie with a sigh of relief. The business trip to Singapore had gone better than expected. The deal closed 3 days ahead of schedule, which meant he could finally go home. "Taking the scenic route, Frank?" Alexander asked his driver, noticing they weren't on their usual path. "Road work on Main Street, sir. This adds 5 minutes but beats sitting in traffic." Alexander nodded, then returned his attention to his phone, scrolling through emails. At 42, he had built his tech company from nothing into a billion-dollar enterprise. The journey had cost him 2 failed marriages, barely any friends, and a house that felt more like a hotel than a home. But tonight, even Alexander had to admit he was looking forward to sleeping in his own bed. "Sir, there's a message from Ms. Lucia," Frank said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Alexander frowned. Lucia had been his housekeeper for nearly 5 years. Quiet, efficient, and private, she kept his massive home running smoothly without ever intruding on his life. Lately, though, she'd been acting differently, requesting strange hours, taking more time off, and being oddly secretive. He opened her message. "We'll be leaving at 7 tonight instead of usual 5:30. Hope that's acceptable." Alexander checked his watch. 6:40 p.m. He'd be home in 15 minutes. So they'd cross paths briefly. He typed a quick reply. "No problem. Heading home now. Trip ended early." Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared as she typed a response, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a simple message arrived. "Welcome home, sir." Something about her response seemed odd, but Alexander was too tired to analyze it. The past month, Lucia had been requesting these schedule changes constantly. Part of him wondered if she was interviewing for other jobs. The thought made him surprisingly uncomfortable. Breaking in a new housekeeper would be inconvenient. "We're about 10 minutes out." "Sir," Frank announced as they turned onto the long road leading to the wealthy neighborhood where Alexander's mansion stood apart from the others, nestled at the end of a private drive. As they approached the security gate, Alexander noticed something unusual. There were cars parked along his driveway. 3 of them, none of which he recognized. "Frank, slow down," he instructed, sitting up straighter. The security system recognized his car, and the gates swung open automatically. As they pulled up the long, curved driveway, Alexander could see lights on in parts of the house that were rarely used. The formal dining room, the West Wing guest rooms, even the old library. "Sir? Should I call security?" Frank asked, clearly noticing the same strange signs. Alexander shook his head, his curiosity outweighing any concern. His home was in a gated community with top-tier security systems. Plus, burglars didn't typically park their cars in the driveway and turn on all the lights. "No, it's fine. Wait for me here." The car came to a stop and Alexander stepped out, briefcase in hand. The evening air was cool and damp from the rain, carrying the scent of wet grass and something else, fresh paint. He walked up the stone steps to his front door, surprised to find it unlocked. Inside, the normally silent foyer was filled with the sound of voices coming from the East Wing, where his rarely used formal living areas were located. Alexander set his briefcase down quietly and followed the sounds. As he rounded the corner into the main hall, he stopped dead in his tracks. The wall between his formal living room and dining room was gone. Completely gone. In its place stood temporary support beams and plastic sheeting. "The chandelier should be centered over where the new island will go," a woman's voice said. Lucia's voice, but with an authority he'd never heard from her before. "That puts it too close to the new archway," a man replied. "We'd need to adjust the whole layout." Alexander pushed aside a sheet of plastic and stepped into what used to be his dining room. The expensive table and chairs had been carefully wrapped and moved aside. The hardwood floors were covered with protective material. 3 people stood with their backs to him, looking at what appeared to be blueprints spread across a makeshift table. "Lucia," Alexander said, his voice cutting through their conversation. All 3 people spun around. 2 men he didn't recognize, one older with silver hair, the other younger with a tablet in hand, and Lucia, his housekeeper, dressed not in her usual simple clothes but in slacks and a professional-looking blouse. Her dark hair pulled back neatly, the color drained from her face. "Mr. Chen, you're home early." The 2 men looked between Lucia and Alexander, clearly sensing the tension. What exactly is happening in my house? Alexander asked, his voice surprisingly calm despite the shock of seeing his home dismantled. Lucia straightened her shoulders. I can explain everything. The older man stepped forward. Mr. Chen, I'm Tom Wilson, the general contractor. This is my associate, Ben. We were just reviewing the final designs with Ms. Lucia. Alexander looked at his housekeeper with raised eyebrows. Final designs? For what exactly? Lucia took a deep breath. For your home renovation. The one you've been talking about for 2 years but never had time to plan. She gestured to the blueprints. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Alexander nodded stiffly. The contractors took the hint, quickly gathering their things. We'll come back tomorrow as scheduled, Tom said to Lucia. Unless... He glanced at Alexander. Tomorrow is fine, Lucia said with surprising confidence. I'll walk you out. Alexander watched in stunned silence as Lucia escorted the men out. He moved to the blueprints they'd left behind, examining what appeared to be extensive plans for his entire first floor. The drawings were detailed and professional, with notes about materials and structural considerations. When Lucia returned, she stood in the doorway for a moment watching him. You know, Alexander said without looking up, when most employees overstep their boundaries, they make a personal call on the company phone or take an extra break. They don't redesign their boss's house. Lucia approached slowly. I know how this looks. Do you? Because it looks like my housekeeper is secretly tearing down walls in my home. Not secretly, she corrected. I've been leaving notes about maintenance work in your monthly home reports for weeks. The ones you never read. Alexander finally looked up at her. In 5 years, he'd never really looked at Lucia properly. She was in her late 30s with intelligent eyes and an air of capability that went beyond household management. Those reports are usually about broken appliances or gardening schedules, not major construction, he said. Lucia reached for a folder on the edge of the table and handed it to him. 6 months ago, you came home from a trip to Milan. You were tired, had a few drinks, and told me your house never felt like a home. You said, and I quote, I spend millions on this place, but it feels like an expensive hotel. You talked for an hour about changes you wanted to make, opening up the main floor, creating spaces where you could actually live instead of just sleep between trips. Alexander vaguely remembered that night. He'd closed a difficult deal and had celebrated perhaps too enthusiastically on the flight home. He opened the folder to find printouts of emails, all from his account, approving various aspects of a home renovation. There were even images of checks with his signature. I don't remember writing these, he said, frowning. Because you didn't read what you were signing, Lucia said simply. Every month when I prepare the household expense reports and checks, I included notes about the renovation progress and the next phase funding. You signed them all. Alexander felt a headache forming. He walked over to what remained of his living room wall and touched the exposed beam. So you've been planning this for months? Based on some drunken rambling? Based on what you actually need, Lucia corrected. And yes, I have certain qualifications that made it possible. She hesitated, then added, Before I became a housekeeper, I was studying architecture. I never finished my degree, but I completed 3 years of training. Alexander turned to look at her with new eyes. You're an architect? Almost was, she said with a small smile. Life took a different turn. For the first time, Alexander noticed the confidence in her stance, the way she looked at the structural elements of the room with a professional eye. How had he never seen this side of her? The money, he began. All properly accounted for, she assured him. The bonus you gave me at Christmas was substantial. I invested it, did well, and used it as the seed money. The rest has come from your household accounts, but I've been careful to maintain detailed records. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed by the scale of what was happening. Lucia, regardless of your intentions or qualifications, this is my home. You can't just decide to renovate it. You're right, she admitted. And if you want to fire me and sue me, that's your right. But before you decide, she walked to the blueprints and turned them toward him. At least let me show you what I've planned, what your home could be. Alexander looked from the blueprints to this woman he thought he knew. Something about her determination intrigued him. After a moment of consideration, he nodded. Show me, he said simply. And as Lucia began to explain her vision, Alexander found himself curious about what else he might have missed while building his empire, and what other surprises his housekeeper might have in store. Alexander followed Lucia through what remained of his formal dining room, still trying to process the magnitude of the changes. The blueprints in her hands were detailed and professional, nothing like what he'd expect from someone who cleaned his home and managed his household staff. "This wall removal opens up the entire first floor," Lucia explained, pointing to where workers had already begun the transformation. "The original layout wasted space and created these isolated rooms you never used." "I used the dining room," Alexander protested. Lucia gave him a knowing look. "For storage, you stack mail on the table and eat takeout in your office." He couldn't argue with that. In 5 years, he'd hosted exactly 2 formal dinners, both for business associates he was trying to impress. The kitchen was separated from everything else, hidden away like in houses built a century ago, Lucia continued. "The new design brings it into the heart of the home with an open concept." She guided him toward the kitchen, where temporary walls of plastic sheeting created a pathway. The expensive Italian marble countertops had been carefully covered and protected. Various kitchen appliances were unplugged and moved to the center of the room. "We're expanding this wall by 4 feet, she said, pointing to chalk marks on the floor, "creating a large island here with seating." "You mentioned wanting to watch the news while having coffee in the morning." Alexander frowned. "When did I mention that?" "Last year. After your trip to that boutique hotel in Barcelona. You said it was the first time you'd enjoyed breakfast in years because you could sit at their kitchen counter and watch the morning news instead of eating alone at a dining table." He vaguely remembered the hotel, but not sharing this detail with Lucia. Had he really revealed so much to his housekeeper over the years? "And this," she said, leading him through another plastic barrier, "is going to be the biggest change." They stepped into what had been a rarely used sitting room. The furniture was gone, and the far wall had been marked with outlines. "This entire wall becomes glass," Lucia said, her voice taking on an excited tone. "Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the garden and pool. We're adding sliding doors here." She walked to the marked outline. They opened to a new covered patio with an outdoor kitchen and fireplace. Alexander looked at the wall, trying to picture it. "That's a major structural change." "The engineering is sound," Lucia assured him. "I had 3 different structural engineers review the plans. The support will come from these steel beams." She pointed to markings on the ceiling. Alexander turned to her, a new question forming. "Lucia, how did you even find these contractors? And how did you get them to take direction from my housekeeper?" Lucia's expression shifted slightly. "I didn't present myself as your housekeeper," she admitted. "I told them I was your home project manager." "You lied." "I reframed my position," she corrected. "Besides, they cared more about who was signing the checks than my job title." Alexander ran a hand through his hair. "Speaking of money, how much has this cost so far?" Lucia handed him a leather portfolio from a nearby workbench. "Every invoice, receipt, and payment is documented here. The total so far is just under $300,000. $300,000? Alexander's voice rose. "That's less than 1% of your net worth," Lucia finished calmly, "and significantly under budget for a renovation of this scale in this neighborhood. I've been very careful with costs." Alexander flipped through the portfolio, noting the meticulous organization of the financial records. Everything was categorized, dated, and included detailed notes. "You've been planning this for months," he said, more statement than question. Lucia nodded. "Since that night you talked about changing the house. I started with research, then preliminary drawings. I reached out to architects to refine the plans, then contractors for bids." She hesitated. "I know this looks bad, like I massively overstepped, and maybe I did. But I also saw an opportunity to create something you needed, but would never make time for yourself." Alexander closed the portfolio and set it down. "Show me the rest." They continued through the first floor. The formal living room was being transformed into a comfortable gathering space, with built-in bookshelves and a new fireplace. The rarely used library was becoming a home theater and music room with acoustic paneling. "You mentioned once that you missed playing piano," Lucia explained. "There's space here for a grand piano if you want to take it up again." Alexander stopped walking. "How do you know I played piano?" 3 years ago. You had a video call with your mother on her birthday. You were in the study and I came in with coffee. You introduced me, and she mentioned how she missed hearing you play. You changed the subject quickly." Alexander stared at her. "You remember a passing comment from a conversation 3 years ago?" It's my job to pay attention, Lucia said simply. To the house, not to me. The house is a reflection of you, she countered. Or it should be. Right now, it's a reflection of what you thought success should look like when you bought it. All those formal spaces you never use, rooms designed to impress people you don't even like. Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. Alexander had purchased the mansion shortly after his company went public. The real estate agent had emphasized how perfect it would be for entertaining, how impressed his guests would be. At the time, that had seemed important. What's upstairs? He asked, changing the subject. Nothing yet, Lucia said. Phase 2 would focus on the master suite and creating a proper home office. But that's only if you approve continuing after seeing Phase 1. They returned to the main area where the blueprints were still spread out on the table. Alexander studied them more carefully this time, noting the thoughtfulness of the design. It wasn't just aesthetically pleasing. It was functional in ways his current house wasn't. Why didn't you tell me? He asked finally. Why all the secrecy and manipulation with the paperwork? Lucia leaned against the table. Would you have listened? Really listened, not just nodded while checking emails on your phone. When he didn't answer, she continued. I tried bringing up the renovation idea directly twice. Both times you said sounds good and we'll discuss it later without looking up from your laptop. Alexander winced, recognizing his behavior. So instead you decided to just do it? I decided to start it, she corrected. The plan was to complete the structural work while you were away, then show you the progress when you returned next week. By then it would be far enough along that you could see the potential, but not so finished that changes couldn't be made. And if I hated it, then I'd be fired, she said matter-of-factly. I knew the risk. Alexander walked to the opening where his dining room wall had been, looking through to what would become the new open kitchen area. He tried to picture it finished. Light streaming in from new windows, space to move freely between rooms, a house designed for living rather than impressing. You really studied architecture? He asked. For 3 years at UCLA, Lucia confirmed. I was 6 months from graduating when my father got sick. Cancer. I dropped out to care for him and never went back. Her voice remained neutral, but Alexander caught a flash of old pain in her eyes. Why not go back after? Life gets complicated, she said with a small shrug. Medical bills, other responsibilities. By the time things settled, I was already working as a house manager for a family in Bel Air. The money was good, the hours steady. Architecture became the path not taken. Alexander looked at her with new understanding. Until now. A small smile formed on Lucia's face. Until now. The silence between them stretched, filled with the weight of decision. Finally, Alexander turned to face her fully. I have 2 conditions, he said. Lucia straightened, her expression cautious but hopeful. I'm listening. First, no more secrets. From now on, everything about this project is discussed with me directly. Real conversations not buried in reports you know I don't read. She nodded. That's fair. And the second condition? Alexander gestured to the blueprints. You're not just the project manager anymore. You're the designer. I want to see more of your vision, not just what you think I want. Surprise flickered across Lucia's face. You're not firing me? For what? Taking initiative. Creating detailed plans. Managing contractors and budgets efficiently? Alexander shook his head. Those are valuable skills, even if your methods were unorthodox. So the renovation continues? With adjustments, Alexander clarified. I want input on the finishes, materials, and some of the layout. But the concept... He looked around at the open space. The concept is good. Relief washed over Lucia's face. Thank you for seeing the potential. I should be thanking you, Alexander admitted. No one's cared this much about my home, about how I actually live, in a very long time. The moment was interrupted by Alexander's phone ringing. He checked the screen and sighed. I have to take this. It's Tokyo. Lucia nodded, gathering the blueprints. I'll clean up here and brief the contractors about the new arrangement. As Alexander walked away to take his call, he found himself looking back at his housekeeper. No, his home designer, with new appreciation. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of excitement about coming home. Whatever Lucia had set in motion, he was suddenly eager to see where it would lead. 3 days had passed since Alexander discovered his home renovation. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by an unexpected enthusiasm. This morning he canceled his flight to New York, something that rarely happened. His business could wait. He wanted to see his house transform. The countertop samples are here, Lucia announced, walking into the temporary office Alexander had set up in one of the guest rooms. She carried a large tray with different stone samples. Alexander looked up from his laptop. He'd been working from home since the discovery, adjusting meetings to virtual when possible. Let's see them. Lucia laid out 6 different samples of stone. These 2 are quartzite, these 3 are granite, and this one's marble. Though I don't recommend marble for kitchen counters. It stains easily. Alexander picked up each sample, feeling their weight and texture. Which would you choose? Lucia pointed to a granite sample with deep blue undertones. This one. It has movement without being too busy, and the color adds depth without overwhelming the space. I like the lighter one, Alexander said, touching a creamy quartzite sample. That one's beautiful too, Lucia agreed, though Alexander caught a hint of reservation in her voice. But you don't like it, he said. It wasn't a question. Lucia hesitated. It's elegant, but high maintenance. It will show every coffee stain and watermark. The darker stone is more forgiving for someone who actually uses their kitchen. And you think I'm going to start cooking? Alexander asked with an amused smile. No. But you might start eating in your kitchen instead of your office. That's progress. Alexander chuckled, then picked up the blue-toned granite. Let's go with this one. You're right about the maintenance. Lucia nodded, clearly pleased with the choice. The flooring contractor needs a decision by tomorrow. We have the options narrowed down to 3. Let me shower and change first, Alexander said, standing up. Then we'll look at flooring. As Alexander headed to his bathroom, he realized how strange this all was. A week ago, he'd barely exchanged 10 words with Lucia on his rare days at home. Now they were discussing design choices like old collaborators. More surprisingly, he was enjoying it. An hour later, they stood in what would become the new great room, looking at large flooring samples laid out on the protected subfloor. Alexander pointed to a warm, medium-toned wood. This one feels right. Good choice, Lucia agreed. It's engineered hardwood with a thick wear layer, durable enough for high-traffic areas but still has the character of real wood. Alexander looked around the space, which was now fully opened up with temporary supports where walls had been. It's hard to believe this is the same house. That's the idea, Lucia said with a small smile. Though we're just getting started. The windows for the back wall arrive tomorrow. That's when you'll really see the difference. Alexander nodded, then checked his watch. I have a video conference in 15 minutes. We'll continue this later? Of course, Lucia said. The contractors need me at the stone yard this afternoon anyway. I'll be back by 5 to review the lighting plan with you. As she gathered the samples, Alexander watched her. There was something different about the way she moved in the house now. More confident, more present. No longer just a shadow keeping things running in the background. Lucia, he said suddenly, why did you really do all this? She looked up, surprised by the directness of the question. I told you. You mentioned wanting changes. And you remembered a drunken conversation from months ago, then invested your own money to make it happen. Alexander interrupted. That's not normal behavior for an employee. Lucia set down the samples and took a moment before answering. Do you remember last Thanksgiving? Alexander frowned, trying to recall. Vaguely. I was home for once, I think. You were, she confirmed. You decided at the last minute not to fly to Chicago for some tech conference. I had already prepared to have the holiday off, but you called and asked if I could come in to make dinner arrangements. I remember now, Alexander said, feeling a twinge of guilt. I ruined your plans. That's not the point, Lucia said. I came in and ordered dinner from that high-end place you like. When it arrived, I set it up in the dining room. You came downstairs, looked at the formal table setting, and just... She paused. You looked so lost in your own home. You asked me if I'd mind setting it up in the kitchen instead. Then you asked if I had plans. You didn't, Alexander recalled. You stayed and had Thanksgiving dinner with me at the kitchen counter. Lucia nodded. And you talked. Really talked. About growing up in a small house with too many people. How everyone gathered in the kitchen. How your mom would give you little jobs to keep you out of trouble while she cooked. Alexander felt something twist inside his chest at the memory. I haven't thought about that in years. You said your favorite part of that small house was how everyone was always together. Lucia continued. No separate wings, no rooms that sat empty for months. You said you had more space in this mansion and somehow felt more alone than ever. And that made you decide to renovate my house? Alexander asked, still confused. Lucia gestured around at the opened-up space. This design isn't just about aesthetics. It's about creating a home where you don't feel alone even when you're the only one here. Open sight lines, connected spaces, areas that draw you in rather than shut you out. Alexander was stunned by the insight. That's surprisingly personal. That's what good design should be, Lucia said simply. Personal. Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang with a reminder about his upcoming call. I have to take this, but we're not done with this conversation. Lucia nodded and continued gathering the samples as he walked away. The rest of the day passed in a blur of business calls and renovation decisions. By evening, Alexander found himself standing in what would be his new kitchen, reviewing the lighting plan with Lucia. These pendant lights over the island are too fancy, he said, pointing to the catalog. They're trying too hard to be impressive. Lucia raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting observation from someone who bought a house specifically to impress people. Ouch, Alexander said, but he was smiling. Fair point. But maybe I've learned something from my home designer. Speaking of which, Lucia said, suddenly serious, there's another part of the design I haven't shown you yet. She led him to what had been a small unused office off the main living area. The walls were marked for removal, with new framing already in place defining a larger space. What's this going to be? Alexander asked. Your home office, Lucia said. But not like the one you have upstairs. This is different. She handed him a detailed rendering. The drawing showed a beautifully designed workspace with built-in shelving, a comfortable seating area, and most surprisingly, a sophisticated video conferencing setup integrated into the room. This is high-end equipment, Alexander noted, recognizing the technology. It's similar to what we have at the company headquarters. That's the point, Lucia said carefully. With this setup, you could conduct most of your meetings without traveling. The acoustics, lighting, and technology would make it virtually the same as being there in person. Alexander looked at her, suddenly understanding. This isn't just a home renovation, is it? Lucia met his gaze steadily. 6 months ago, I overheard a conversation between you and your doctor when he made a house call. You thought I was outside, but I was changing linens in the next room. Alexander felt his chest tighten. What did you hear? He told you your current lifestyle was unsustainable. The constant travel, the stress, the irregular schedule. He said if you didn't make changes, you were heading for serious health problems. Lucia's voice was gentle but direct. You promised to think about it, but then I watched you book 3 international trips the following week. Alexander turned away, looking at the framing of what would be his new office. So this renovation is partly an intervention, Lucia admitted. Creating a home you actually want to be in, with spaces that allow you to work effectively without constantly traveling. That's overstepping, Alexander said quietly, though there was no anger in his voice. Yes, Lucia acknowledged, but I've worked for you for 5 years. I've watched you run yourself into the ground. Sometimes the people who see us every day notice what we're missing. Alexander stood silently for a long moment. Finally, he turned back to her. Show me the rest of the plans for this room. Lucia hesitated. You're not upset? I'm processing, Alexander said honestly, but I want to see what else you've planned. As Lucia began explaining the details of the home office design, Alexander listened with new awareness. His housekeeper hadn't just been rebuilding his house, she'd been trying to rebuild his life. The question now was whether he'd allow it to happen. A week into the renovation, Alexander sat on a temporary chair near the massive opening where his back wall once stood. Workers had just finished installing the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time, he could see Lucia's vision taking shape. The late afternoon light poured in, filling the space with warmth that his house had never known before. What do you think? Lucia asked, coming to stand beside him. It's... Alexander paused, searching for the right word. It's alive. The house feels alive. Lucia smiled, clearly pleased by his reaction. Wait until the sliding doors are installed tomorrow. You'll be able to open this entire wall to the outside. Alexander nodded, still taking in the transformation. He had lived in this house for 7 years, but had never truly noticed the view of his own backyard. The manicured gardens, the infinity pool that blended into the horizon, they had always been there. but somehow disconnected from the house itself. I have meetings in Singapore next month, Alexander said suddenly. They've been on the calendar for months. Important client meetings. Lucia's smile faded slightly. I see. I was thinking, he continued, about what you said. About the home office design allowing me to work remotely. Yes? How quickly could that room be finished? Before the rest of the renovation? Lucia's eyes widened slightly. You want to prioritize the office? If it's as good as you say it will be, Alexander said, maybe I could test it out. Use it for some of the Singapore meetings instead of flying there. The smile returned to Lucia's face, broader than before. We could expedite it. I'd need to shuffle some contractors around, but it's doable. 2 weeks, maybe less. Do it, Alexander said firmly. Lucia nodded and made a note on her tablet. I'll make the arrangements. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for considering the alternative. Alexander turned back to the view. I'm not making any promises, but I'm willing to try. Later that evening, Alexander found himself in the kitchen, watching as Lucia reviewed plans with the cabinet installer. The kitchen was taking shape now. New cabinets lined the walls, waiting for countertops. The island frame stood in the center of the space, defining the heart of the new open-concept design. Mr. Chen, the installer said, noticing Alexander, Ms. Lucia has excellent taste. These cabinets will look spectacular with the countertops you've chosen. Alexander nodded. She does have good taste. After the installer left, Alexander helped Lucia gather the scattered papers and samples. You know, he said, it's interesting to see how everyone treats you now. What do you mean? Lucia asked. The contractors, the designers. They treat you with respect, like a professional. He organized a stack of receipts, different from how they might treat a housekeeper. Lucia stiffened slightly. There's nothing wrong with being a housekeeper. I didn't mean it like that, Alexander backtracked. I just meant, it seems like you're in your element now, doing what you were trained to do. Lucia's expression softened. It does feel good, she admitted. Using those skills again after so long. Why didn't you ever go back to school? Alexander asked. Finish your degree? Lucia sat down on one of the temporary stools. Life is complicated. After my father died, there were debts to pay. Then my younger brother needed help with college tuition. She shrugged. Working as a house manager paid well. The years just passed. But you never stopped thinking like a designer, Alexander observed. No, she agreed. I guess I didn't. A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued organizing the paperwork. Finally, Alexander spoke again. You knew a lot about me, he said. The piano playing, the memories of my childhood home, even my health concerns. But I realize I know almost nothing about you despite you working here for 5 years. Lucia looked up, surprised by the observation. You never asked. The simple statement hit Alexander harder than he expected. No, he admitted. I never did. 2 more weeks passed and the renovation was proceeding at a remarkable pace. True to her word, Lucia had prioritized the home office, which was now nearly complete. The built-in shelving had been installed, the custom desk was in place, and the high-end video conferencing equipment was being calibrated by specialists. Alexander stood in the doorway, admiring the transformation. The room wasn't just functional, it was beautiful, with warm wood tones, comfortable seating, and perfect lighting. Most importantly, it felt personal, with shelves already filled with his books and meaningful objects that Lucia had collected from around the house. We need to test the system, the tech specialist said, adjusting the main camera. Could you sit at the desk, Mr. Chen? Alexander took his place behind the desk, feeling the comfortable chair conform to his body. The screens came to life around him, displaying camera feeds and presentation spaces. Call my assistant, Alexander instructed. A moment later, his assistant's face appeared on the main screen, looking so clear and lifelike it was as if she were in the room. Mr. Chen, she said, surprised. I thought you were at home. I am, Alexander replied, unable to keep the smile from his face. How does this look on your end? Perfect, she said. Better than the conference room at headquarters, actually. The lighting is much more natural. Alexander conducted a brief meeting with her, testing the various features of the system. When they finished, he sat back, impressed. This is remarkable, he said to the tech specialist. It's better than being there in person. That was the goal, Lucia said, appearing in the doorway. Perfect communication without the physical toll of travel. After the specialist left, Alexander remained at the desk, exploring the features of his new workspace. Lucia brought him coffee, setting it on the built-in side table. "This isn't just a home office," Alexander said. "It's a command center." "You run a global company," Lucia replied. "You need a space that reflects that, while still being comfortable enough that you'll actually use it." Alexander turned to face her. "I've been thinking about what you said. About my lifestyle being unsustainable." Lucia waited, not interrupting. "My doctor didn't just warn me," Alexander admitted. "He showed me test results. Blood pressure, cholesterol, stress markers, all heading in the wrong direction. He said if I didn't change something, I was looking at serious problems within 5 years." "I'm sorry," Lucia said quietly. "That must have been frightening." Alexander shrugged. "I ignored it. Told myself I'd deal with it later. There was always another deal, another meeting, another reason to push myself." He gestured around the office. "But sitting here seeing what's possible, maybe there's another way to work." "That's what I hoped," Lucia said. "But ultimately, it's your decision." Alexander nodded, then looked at his watch.
"I have a call with the Singapore team in 20 minutes.
"It was supposed to be preliminary before my trip next month." He met her eyes. "I think I'll tell them I won't be coming in person. We can do the meetings from here instead." The smile that spread across Lucia's face was worth more than Alexander expected. "I think that's a wise choice," she said simply. "But," Alexander added, "that means this office needs to be flawless, and I'll need your help managing it all. The time differences for international calls, the setup for presentations, it's a lot to coordinate." "Of course," Lucia said. "I can handle that. Which brings me to something I've been considering," Alexander continued. "Your role here has clearly changed. You're not just managing my household anymore. You're designing my home, coordinating a major renovation, and now helping with my business communications." Lucia looked uncertain. "Is that a problem?" "No," Alexander said. "But it deserves recognition. I'd like to officially change your position. New title, new salary, something that reflects what you're actually doing." "What did you have in mind?" Lucia asked cautiously. "How does Director of Home Design and Operations sound?" "With a salary to match?" Lucia's eyes widened. "That sounds generous." "It's fair," Alexander corrected. "And there's something else." He hesitated, then continued. "Once this renovation is complete, would you consider taking on another project? Another renovation?" Lucia looked confused. "I own several properties," Alexander explained. "Investment properties mostly that I've never done much with. With your skills, we could transform them, make them special." He leaned forward. "It could be a chance for you to build a real portfolio. Get back into the field you trained for." Lucia stood very still, clearly processing his offer. "You'd trust me with that?" "You've earned it," Alexander said simply. "The question is, are you interested?" Lucia didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window, looking out at the garden beyond. When she turned back, her expression was thoughtful. "When I started this renovation," she said slowly, "I never imagined it would lead here. I thought I'd either be fired or, best case, thanked and kept on as your housekeeper." "Life takes unexpected turns," Alexander said. "You taught me that." Lucia smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm interested. Very interested." Alexander nodded, feeling a sense of rightness settle over him. "Good. Then let's finish making this house a home, and then see what else we can build together." As Lucia left to check on the other contractors, Alexander turned back to his new desk, preparing for his call with Singapore. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of excitement about the future that had nothing to do with business deals or profit margins. Something was changing in his carefully ordered world, and surprisingly, he was welcoming it. 6 months had passed since Alexander came home early to find his house being transformed. Now, standing in his completed great room, he could hardly remember what the old space looked like. The previously dark, compartmentalized rooms had been replaced by an airy, open-concept living area that flowed seamlessly from the kitchen to the dining space, to the comfortable seating area, and out through sliding glass doors to the new covered patio beyond. "Final inspection passed with flying colors," Lucia announced, walking in with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Every permit signed off, every detail complete." Alexander smiled. "Worth celebrating." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. The renovation had expanded beyond the original plans, encompassing not just the first floor, but also updating his master suite and creating 2 additional guest rooms with private baths. The result was a home that finally felt like it belonged to him, not just an expensive showpiece. Lucia poured the champagne and handed him a glass. "A toast," she said. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Alexander echoed, clinking his glass against hers. They moved to the patio, settling into the comfortable outdoor furniture. The evening was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the newly planted garden. Beyond the pool, the city lights were beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over the hills. "I have something for you," Alexander said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to Lucia. She looked at him questioningly before opening it. Inside was a key attached to a silver keychain engraved with an address. "What's this?" she asked. "The address is for a small office space downtown," Alexander explained. "It's yours if you want it." Lucia looked up, surprised. "Mine?" "For your design business," Alexander clarified. "It's time you made it official." Over the past months, as the renovation of Alexander's home progressed, Lucia had begun working on preliminary designs for 2 of his investment properties as well. Her talent was undeniable, and her confidence had grown with each project. "Alexander, I don't know what to say," Lucia said, turning the key over in her hand. "Say you'll take it," he replied. "The lease is paid for a year. Consider it seed money for your new venture." "This is too generous," she protested. "It's an investment," Alexander corrected, "in someone with extraordinary talent." Lucia's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Thank you," she said simply. "I won't disappoint you." "I know you won't." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the last of the daylight faded from the sky. So much had changed since that fateful evening when Alexander had come home early. "Do you remember that first night?" Lucia asked, as if reading his thoughts. "When you found me with the contractors. I was sure you were going to fire me on the spot." Alexander chuckled. "I considered it. For about 5 minutes. What changed your mind?" He thought for a moment. "I saw someone who cared enough to take a tremendous risk. Not for personal gain, but because they believed in something better." He looked around at his transformed home. "You were right, by the way. About the house?" "About all of it," Alexander admitted. "The house, my lifestyle, the toll it was taking." He held up his champagne glass. "My doctor called yesterday with my new test results. Blood pressure normal. Cholesterol down. Stress markers significantly improved." Lucia's face brightened. "That's wonderful news." 4 trips canceled in 6 months, Alexander continued. Dozens of meetings conducted from my home office. And surprisingly, the business hasn't collapsed. He shook his head, smiling ruefully. "If anything, it's doing better. Turns out I make clearer decisions when I'm not constantly jet-lagged." "Who would have thought?" Lucia teased. "You did," Alexander said, his tone more serious now. "You saw it before I could." A comfortable silence fell between them again, broken only by the soft sound of water from the infinity pool. Finally, Lucia spoke. "I gave notice to Mrs. Rodriguez next door today," she said. Alexander looked surprised. "You're still working there?" "I thought with everything here and the investment properties. Just 2 days a week," Lucia explained. "But with the new design business, it's time to let that go." Alexander nodded, understanding. "So what happens now? With your position here?" It was the question that had been lingering between them for weeks. With the renovation complete, and Lucia starting her own design business, her role as Alexander's director of home design and operations was becoming less defined. Lucia took a sip of her champagne before answering. "That depends on what you want." "I was thinking," Alexander began carefully, "that perhaps we could restructure our arrangement." "I'm listening." "You've built a beautiful home here," he said, gesturing around them. "But maintaining it while starting your new business will be challenging. And I still need someone to manage the household. So you want me to stay on as your house manager?" Lucia asked, her expression unreadable. "Not exactly," Alexander said. "I was thinking more along the lines of a partnership." Lucia's eyebrows rose. "Partnership?" Alexander set his glass down and turned to face her fully. "You have a gift for creating spaces that feel like home. I have properties that need that touch. I'm proposing we form a proper business partnership. You handle the design and renovation. I provide the properties and financing. We share the profits, and that's unexpected," Lucia said slowly. "Is it?" Alexander asked. "We've been working well together for months now. You know my taste, I trust your judgment. It seems like a natural progression. Lucia considered his proposal, her expression thoughtful. And the household management? We hire someone, Alexander said simply. You've outgrown that role, Lucia. We both know it. She nodded slowly, taking in his words. This partnership, would we be equals? Absolutely, Alexander confirmed. Equal say, equal stake. I'd need to see the details in writing, Lucia said, practical as always. Contract terms, profit-sharing structure, decision-making protocols. Alexander smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. I'll have the lawyers drop the paperwork tomorrow. And what about this house? Lucia asked, looking around. You've just finished renovating it. Are you ready to move on already? This will always be home base, Alexander assured her. But there's no reason we can't expand our vision. Think bigger. Lucia's smile grew slowly as she considered the possibilities. Residential properties? Commercial spaces? Whatever interests you, Alexander said. I have connections in both markets. Lucia raised her glass. Then I propose another toast. To partnership. Alexander clinked his glass against hers. To partnership. As they finished their champagne, Alexander's phone chimed with a message. He glanced at it and sighed. The Tokyo team. They're still pushing for an in-person meeting next month. What will you tell them? Lucia asked. Alexander considered for a moment, then smiled. That they're welcome to come here. We have plenty of room now. Lucia laughed. Using the house as a business asset already? That wasn't in the original design brief. Plans evolve, Alexander said with a shrug. Isn't that what you taught me? The next morning, Alexander woke earlier than usual. Instead of reaching for his phone to check emails, he pulled on casual clothes and made his way downstairs. The house was quiet, filled with soft morning light streaming through the new windows. He made coffee in his redesigned kitchen, then carried his cup out to the patio. The morning air was cool and fresh, the garden peaceful. For the first time in years, Alexander felt truly at home and, more importantly, truly present. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Normally, he would have answered immediately, but today he let it go to voicemail. Some changes were worth protecting. A car pulled into the driveway, Lucia arriving for their first official day as business partners. She stepped out carrying a portfolio and a bakery box, dressed in professional attire that suited her new role perfectly. Alexander watched her approach, struck by how different their relationship was from just 6 months ago. They had gone from employer and employee to collaborators, from strangers who shared a space to partners with a shared vision. Good morning, Lucia called as she neared the patio. Ready to start our new venture? Alexander stood to greet her, feeling a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. More ready than I've ever been. As they settled at the outdoor table, spreading out property listings and design concepts, Alexander realized that the greatest renovation hadn't been to his house at all, but to his life. And it had all started because he came home early one day and discovered his maid executing not just a home transformation, but his own personal wake-up call. Sometimes, he thought, the most valuable things happen when our carefully laid plans get interrupted, and sometimes the people we overlook are exactly the ones who see us most clearly.